Oh, we're good.
Okay.
Are you there? Am I here? Hello, everybody. Losing it. I'm here with my really good friend Joe Polish. We're at your home in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know about Joe Polish, he is Genius Network everything. He's just an amazing. You're like an Olympic gold medalist in the marketing world.
Mm-hmm.
And like honestly, screw all that. You are just like a great friend. You are
Thank
just
you. And likewise.
a playful dude with a big heart. We're gonna get to that. So thank you for being here, hanging out.
Absolutely. I'm super happy that you're here. We had a fun time. JP actually did a really great talk, if you want to call it that.
I don't know what to call it, but
yeah.
Go on. You said it was great.
It was at Changing Hands Bookstore in Tempe, and you're heading off to San Diego tonight. You're going to do a book signing in San Diego in La Jolla.
Yeah,
and it was great.
At 4 p.m.
So we had a bunch of people out, and it was funny, and it was awesome, and great community, and a lot of shenanigans, and so we've been having a good time.
Yeah, and then I think we've also been competing with each other, like who can tell the worst jokes, and I think somehow we're both winning, which kind of means we're both losing at the same time.
Yes, but there were some good ones. So we've been hanging out with friends. We did yoga this morning with a great yoga instructor named Giselle, and it's been a good time. But now we're about to get real.
Yeah, we are. But you brought up an important point about yoga before we get real. Let's get real about yoga. We just told you that we did yoga, which is responsible for at least 75% of the results you get from doing yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that. And I am drinking something very genius. It's a gross looking green juice, but here's the genius part of it. It's vegetable juice with chicken broth in it at the same time. So this is very suitable for both vegans and meat eaters. It's like an equal opportunity beverage. But pretending to get real for a second, buckle in. Buckle in. We're going to be here for the next 19 hours. It's going to be like a telethon of consciousness.
We're not going to sleep.
We're going
to let this thing roll.
We will likely not fall asleep while we're doing this. But, Joe, I'm going to pretend like I'm Oprah for a second. And like, this is going to be confusing. It's like I'll be interviewing you, talking to you, and then just talking to you like you're actually here instead of interviewing. So in other words, we'll see what happens. But one of the things that impresses me, like you are incredibly well accomplished in the business world. Like if you don't know Joe Polish, just like Google him, you'll see amazing things. But what fascinates me way more than what you accomplish is what drives you, your passion. And would you be willing to share like the big time cause, the passion that's driving you present day?
Well, my big passion project, if you want to call it that, is I have a business that teaches entrepreneurs how to build and grow their companies. I have millions of people that have downloaded my podcasts on business. And what I am doing in my life right now, what I think is my calling, is to help change the global conversation about how people view addicts and addiction, and to treat addicts with compassion, not with judgment. And the reason that I resonate so much with that is I am an addict in my drugs and behavior. And you can ask me about anything. I will be as open as I can be, as long as it's hopefully helpful to people. And look, I love goofing around. I love joking. As a matter of fact, humor brings a level of relief to some of the pain and anxiety that humans experience. And certainly if it wasn't for humor, some of the darkest, hardest times in my life, and since so much of my work is now being focused on people with addictions, I want to bring as much humor and joy to them as possible, which is why it's great to talk to you, because you do a combination of both, And so I really want to change the global conversation about how people view addicts. And the reason being is, we're in America right now, and there's almost 1% of the U.S. population which is incarcerated, and you cannot punish pain out of people. And now, a couple things I want to do as we get into this subject is I'm interested in addiction, I'm interested in recovery, I'm interested in finding the best forms of treatment that have efficacy and delivering those to people, as much of it as possible for free, because a lot of addicts don't have any money, they're struggling, and family members and all the pain. I mean, it's across the board. Hundreds of thousands of people die every year from tobacco, alcohol, lots of deaths, lots of chaos, opiate addictions. The current stats are something like 78 people a day are dying of opiate addictions in the U.S., and every year it is increasing substantially. I mean, in 2014, deaths by drugs exceeded car accident deaths, which was like 37,000 car accident deaths, and then addiction was like 49,000, and now it's even far greater every year, and it's just getting worse and worse. So we're dealing with the largest addiction crisis in human history.
Yeah, you know, I know you have you alluded to a background of experientially being an addict, and I know you've shared with me some of these stats. I'd like to talk more about those in a second. And personally, I haven't been an addict that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm just addicted to not being an addict.
It's possible. It is possible, I guess.
Hopefully that doesn't get cured. But I was very touched. Must have been 3-4 months ago at this point. One of my absolute best friends. We've been friends since we were 11 years old. His brother died from addiction, from prescription painkillers, and that definitely hit home. And then you came into my life and started sharing with me your passion, and I like how you say you're out to change, amongst other things, change the global conversation about addiction, because it seems to me like we as in society kind of write addicts off, like, whatever, they're less than human. But like, you do the math, and like, those are humans on very powerful chemically, biological, chemically altering substances that might make them act inhuman, but those are humans.
Right, and it's part of is separating bad behavior from badness. Yeah. I mean, like, and by the way, if you think you may not resonate with this, like the recent Surgeon General report that came out at the end of last year has it listed that 1 out of 7 people in America struggle with addiction. And I would venture to say that this is worldwide. This is a global, not just a global problem, it's a global epidemic. I think the vast majority of wars, diseases, lifestyle diseases and things are caused by this thing we call addiction. And so the question is, to give a couple definitions. I mean, there's a lot of different definitions I've heard of addiction. The way that I think about addiction, it's a connection disorder. So what we're really talking about here is how to connect with others, how to connect with yourself, and there's mechanisms that people use to numb themselves because they're feeling disconnected.
A connection disorder. I mean, talk about piercing, symptomatic crap. Connection disorder. So what if addiction, maybe all addiction, maybe something, what if addiction is a symptom of us not being connected the way we need? Is that essentially what I'm hearing you say?
Absolutely. That's huge, right? Absolutely. The opposite of addiction is connection. And so the thing, and there's other people that are saying this, like my dear friend Gabor Mate, who wrote a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghost, who's, he believes that addiction is a response to trauma. And I used to believe that addiction was a brain disease and needed to be cured. And I'd rather people refer to it as a brain disease than looking at people as moral degenerates that are just making bad choices, because addiction is doing something you don't want to do, or maybe you do want to do it and not being able to stop. And in this thing that you're doing, either the drugs, the chemicals, the behavior, is compulsive, it's impulsive, and it has consequences that are bad. Yeah. And so to have a craving that is far greater than your ability to stop it. In people that don't have addictions and they see the crazy making of addicts, like, why are you drinking and drugging and watching internet porn and gambling the money away, or the workaholism, or the exercise addiction, or the bulimic? All addictions have elements of binging and purging, excess and deprivation. And there's the rock band Guns N' Roses from back in the day. Their first most popular album was called Appetite for Destruction. And those three words really greatly describe what an addict is craving. They are craving destruction. Addicts crave, the addict mind craves chaos, not harmony. And for some reason, it's very difficult for people to comprehend that. For instance, if someone's not a smoker and hates smoking, as an example, my father died from lung cancer, and he smoked most of his life. And people, and so I hate cigarettes. I can't stand cigarettes. I don't like the smell of them. But when I was a drug addict, I used to smoke cigarettes. And I used to smoke cocaine. I used to freebase cocaine. I used to snort crystal meth. I used to take speed. I would take LSD. I would get high and smoke pot. I mean, I drink constantly. I mean, when it was just like constant consumption. And, it would be real easy to say, well, that person's an idiot. And you could argue, well, but I'll tell you, when I was in those moments, it was way more powerful than my ability to control that. And what I was really trying to do was just numb myself, because I was in pain. I was depressed. I felt anxious. I felt fearful. And so if someone is depressed or having anxiety or incredibly lonely or fearful or just wants to jump out of their skin or is hating life, there's nothing wrong with wanting that pain to go away.
Yeah.
If you just itch, there's nothing wrong with wanting the itching to stop. The challenge is the mechanisms we choose to scratch the itch. And so what happens with addiction is that people are trying to numb themselves, but the way that they're going about trying to escape it is actually making it worse. So when I say I want to change the global conversation about how people view addicts, the question, well, how are you going to do that? Well, part of it is quit looking at these individuals as moral degenerates. These are people that are traumatized, and the things that they're doing.
People.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, if you look at people in jail, like, you cannot punish pain out of people. And we're putting these people in cages. Now, granted, addicts in their worst states lie, they cheat, they steal, they can do harm, they can drink and drive and kill people, they can rob stores. I mean, they can do awful things. However, most addicts aren't doing those things. Most addicts are like just hurt individuals, and they're trying to escape this mental pain and anguish. And so the way that I am thinking about addiction right now, and by the way, everything that I'm saying, I am a student just as much as, I'm an addict that's out searching for solutions, talking to some of the best people in the world because of who I am. I have an opportunity to use my business contacts and what I do in the world to actually get into places that many people cannot. So I'm really seeking this out, but I'm also a beginner's mind. I'm always open to have my paradigm shifted. I'm always open to say, what don't I know? And unlearning is more important than learning. So as I'm on this journey, I'm looking at addiction as a solution, which sounds crazy to some people, but I start thinking, okay, if the world is flat, and you think the world is flat, you're going to interact with the world as a flat world.
Sure.
But once you learn the world is round, that changes everything about how you look at the world. Well, if you think addicts are moral degenerates and they're losers and they should be thrown in prison, then who's going to treat these people? The criminal justice system.
Sure.
Judges, wardens, police officers. And these people are not equipped, nor are they trained to treat people that are addicts in a compassionate way. They need to get them off the street, they need to throw them in jail, they need to process them, lock them up. And most people that are in 80 to 90% of crimes that are committed, people were under the influence, for one. And most of those crimes are not violent crimes. A lot of these people that are in jail, possession, things like that. And the reality is, people that you cannot punish the pain out of people, and you can't incarcerate them. And Gabor Mate said, if you wanted to create the perfect system that kept people as addicts, you would develop the exact prison system that we have in the United States.
Yeah, and the idea of the connection, the lack of connection, in my opinion, one of the most fundamental human needs, maybe the most fundamental human need that we all have, I don't care who you are, we all have it, is the need for connection. What does it feel like to be disconnected? Living hell. is in a sense. And so if people are acting out with addictive behaviors, with addictive chemicals, because it's a symptom of them being disconnected, then when you look at, well, our system, the way it's set up, the prison system, none of that is offering connection.
Oh, no,
and,
no.
Connection's a matter of the heart, not like, okay, there's a cement cage to connect to. Like, no. So I'm curious because I love where you're going with this. I think insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think we as a society, we have so many systems set up to treat the symptoms of addiction. And I think we've proven about 12,000 times in a row it doesn't work.
Right.
It might temporarily patch things. It might keep people out of harm's way temporarily. But to get to the heart of the matter, I dare say we have to go to the heart. So when we look at the disconnection that is maybe the deepest form of human suffering, with addicts, where does the disconnection come from?
Well, there's a lot of things. So let me give some commentary on that too. I want to say one more thing about the solution aspect of it is when I say addiction is a solution, it actually numbs you if you're in pain. If you're feeling disconnected, you can artificially get high. You can, you can act out sexually. You can gamble and get an adrenaline surge. You can look at internet screens and you can get dopamine hits. I mean, there's all kinds of stimulation that will make you feel artificially connected, and that will numb the pain. And that is a solution. The problem is this is a solution that will kill you in some cases. So if you can survive addiction, it might get you through some sort of painful moments. The challenge is it actually creates more. But I'll say the connection this way. So like Dr. Bob and Bill W., they're the ones that founded AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, in the 1930s. And to this day, there are millions of people that rely on 12-step groups. Now, if you have never been to a 12-step group, or you like or dislike 12-step groups, or whatever perspective you have about it, I want you to know that if 12-step groups just stopped, like tomorrow, and these are worldwide, the world would be a much different place.
It would be screwed.
We would literally probably go into war. I mean, there are so many people that go to 12-step groups. Now, why do they go to 12-step groups? They're trying to connect with other addicts, right? And hope heals. And so when you are able to walk into a room where you're so broken and so desperate that you have to really say, I need help, these groups are, readily available for free. And they operate through the voluntary contributions of their members. But this is not a sort of like, hey, let's endorse 12-step groups, although I think they're incredibly valuable. There's many other things that I believe will help with addiction, and 12 steps are just one of them. And so Bill W. and Dr. Bob founded AA in the 30s, and there's a quote from Bill W. where he said, as alcoholics, we're trying to drink God out of a bottle. And I always even say, even if you're an atheist, if you just think of that statement, like, okay, as an alcoholic, we're trying to drink God out of a bottle. I believe, however someone wants to define spirituality, and I can make fun of it just as much as like you.
I don't make fun of spirituality.
He does. He was just doing it before this video.
I'd be offended if that ever happened.
And so, if you think about that, he's like, okay, we're trying to drink God out of a bottle. And addicts are actually the most spiritually potential people, I believe, because they're trying to connect with something.
Sure.
Let's get high. Let's, I'm trying to drink my way to this void I'm feeling. I'm trying to, if you're a sex addict, you're trying to, have sex or look at porn. If you're gambling, you're just trying to connect with that feeling, something, so you can feel exhilarated, so you can feel better. It's just
strongly looking for connection where it's not.
Exactly.
But it is the desire for connection at some level that drives the reaching to the addiction.
I think most forms of self-destruction are looking for love in all the wrong places. But it's seducing, it's tempting, it's exhilarating. Believe me, I mean, a lot of my, because my addictions have been drugs, alcohol, sex, work, exercise, performance addiction, image management. I mean, all of the shit that goes into, living a double life is exhausting. And, if you start looking at self-destructive behavior, and I'm sure everyone that is watching this or listening to this that is like connected with being a human. They have done things that they wish they would have done differently, they regret, they, procrastinate, they, can't make their goals happen, they don't do New Year's resolutions, maybe they've lied, maybe they've cheated, maybe they stole, maybe they've done something that they're horribly shamed about. Addiction is rooted in isolation, it's rooted in shame, it's rooted in guilt, it's rooted in self-loathing, isolation, and so humans have experienced things. Different people respond to different things and have different sensitivity levels. But if you just sit and think about, like, did you have loving, wonderful parents that you felt really connected with? If you did, then you probably feel more connected as a human. But if you had a parent die, if you were molested, like, my mother died when I was 4 years old. My father never remarried. He was a totally broken person. He didn't know how to cope with it. And so I don't remember many aspects of my childhood that were very happy. Now, given the circumstances, even when people do awful shit, I believe most human beings, when I'm thinking from my higher self, whatever that higher self is, and a lot of times I'm not, I believe most people, even when they're doing crazy shit, are doing the best they know how to do given the circumstances. Sure. And so my father, tried to do the best he could do, but he was a really broken person. So therefore, he didn't know quite how to instill a lot of confidence, a lot of self-esteem, a lot of love. I was molested as a kid. I used to get paid money to not say anything about it. And it wired in my mind that sex is not an intimate act of love and oneness. It's something that you do just to get off. So I was never able to feel comfortable with sexuality. I was never able to feel comfortable with connection. And it's funny because now I'm known as this connector in business because I connect, all kinds of, great people.
Off the charts. And if you said so much, and I want you to keep going.
No, please interrupt me at any point in time if there's,
I already interrupted you.
He just did that. Did you see that?
Yeah. But, so, and I love your vulnerability. So your mother died when you were 4. Mm-hmm. If that's not disconnection with a capital D, I don't know what would be. Your father couldn't cope with the loss of his wife. He became psychologically unavailable. That's disconnection with a capital D. And then you got a form of connection. Now, granted, none of us would say this was a great form of connection. It was shitty connection, but it was connection. Mm-hmm. You were molested.
Yeah, I was molested.
So that was a sexual experience that you learned to associate. Sexual stimulation equals connection. It especially equals way more connection that I'm getting with mom who's passed away. Mm-hmm. Way more connection that I'm getting with dad who's maybe there physically but not there really psychologically. So that made an impression on you. You were a little boy who became desperate for connection. Mm-hmm. And life gave you an example, albeit really a crappy example from our standards today, but it gave you an example of what connection was, and you ran with it.
Yeah, and what I did is there's not a day that's gone by in my adult life where I've not thought about that. Yeah. And it's in the rumination, the preoccupation, and for years I had so much of my self-worth tied into this shameful, violated piece of shit that I felt like after that happened, because and it didn't happen once, it happened multiple times, and I didn't know how to interpret it because I was between the ages of 8 and 10 years old, and and so part of it is like it didn't make any sense, and I used to minimize it. I never told anyone about it. I mean, now I publicly am talking about this shit, like right now, but it took years before I could realize that you're as sick as your secrets. And if you have sickness and you feel shameful and you feel like you can't get ahead, I mean, there's probably something that is interfering with it. Meaning the sun is always there. There just may be clouds that are. And so my form of clouds were addiction. My form of clouds were hiding it and denial and trying to, escape it in any way that I could escape it. And I used to say, but I don't live in a third world country. I wasn't starving to death. I wasn't thrown in a concentration camp. And I've got people like Gabor Mate that said, how does a 4-year-old, do you know any 4-year-olds? He's like, how does a 4-year-old respond to their mother dying. I mean, you're 4. How would you? And I'd be like, he's like, abandonment, how would? And so you were right though. Like, it is a form of connection. And what I've learned, and by the way, just so any of you that have just joined us, we're talking about addiction. We're talking about recovery. I have geniusrecovery.com, which is getting ready to launch right now. That website redirects to Artists for Addicts, which is one of our platforms where we are selling art, and we're using art as a force for good, and we're using that revenue to create documentaries and to put information out into out into the world. And I think JP needs to actually charge his battery here.
Yeah,
so
we're
we
getting
good?
the battery all connected.
So artistsforaddicts.com. If anyone, if you have to go halfway through this video, or if you just want to see what we're doing, there's a trailer that shows some of the things that we're doing with this project with addiction. But anyway, part of the goal is to find the best forms of treatment that have efficacy, where people can go and find community, sharing inspirational videos, talking with addicts, and just putting that stuff out there in the world, because I want to help connect people, because I never felt that connection growing up. And so I initially found it through doing drugs and escapism. But the way that I defined myself, it took me years to really kind of make any sense about it. And what I would want people to actually think about, who do you know in your life that is struggling with addiction? If you yourself are struggling with addiction or a behavior that it's kind of like, there's a song lyric, I tell myself I will not go even as I drive there. Mm-hmm. And if you could imagine, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be in this relationship, this person hurts me, this person beats me, this person is abusive, this environment is abusive, but you keep walking through that door. What it did for me is it somehow created this template. So when you take sex addiction, which is, there's an interview I did with Pat Carnes years ago. Now people, if they just type in Joe Polish sex addiction into YouTube, you can watch the video, and I'd watch the full-length video if you're interested in this, about an hour and 45 minutes long. And we talk about arousal templates. Mm-hmm. And whenever someone is introduced to sexuality, they have an arousal template. So if you, like you were saying earlier with connection, if you're introduced into sex by being raped or being molested or in some sort of dangerous way, what's weird is that there, in many cases, you can create a trauma bond, where you actually bond with the trauma, and then you live your life out pursuing things that kind of reenact some of the shit that was done to you. So when you see a woman that will be attracted to guys that beat her or are mean, that are abusive, and you look back at, well, what happened in the life? It wasn't always being molested or assaulted. It could have been an alcoholic parent. It could have been some sort of abandonment. It could have been some sort of exposure to a disease. It could have been a horrible car accident. But there was some sort of trauma, and people bond with traumas. And then they seek out these sort of things, and they're just trying to connect. I mean, it doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But
it's not a logical issue. It's an emotional issue.
It's subconscious.
Emotions don't work logically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've brought up the I have a hair in my mouth. Sure as hell didn't.
You might want to not do the long hair and the beard then.
Probably not. In personally, my 15 years of doing emotional healing client coaching, I'll certainly raise my hand and say I didn't specialize in working with addicts. Yes, I think we're all addicted to something. And at the beginning of this, I said, well, I haven't had addiction in my life. And then you mentioned workaholism. It's like, oh, yeah, I've been addicted to not seeing my addiction. So yeah,
workaholism's the respectable addiction, by the way.
Sure. And yeah, maybe more functional than others. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, realizing to some degree, all people are addicted to something if it's not a clinical problem. What I found with the folks I've worked with over the course of my 15 years of doing emotional healing work is what would heal the shame, what would heal the guilt, what would heal the anger and the fear is connection with thyself.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean to just placate this and like, oh yeah, heal it, connect to yourself. It's like, yeah, great words that are very useless to say because it's a very much a journey. But I personally really found value in encouraging people and working with myself in my life, looking at the emotions, the traumas, the wounding, and the pain that we still carry, whether we know it's there or it's there but we don't know it. But making connection with those emotions is a big connection, because what we connect to when we're connecting to the emotions that are so painful and so intimidating is the part of us that holds that emotion.
Right.
I do a lot of inner child work, so it's like when I went through a wounding experience when I was 7, very shaming, disconnected from it for a couple decades, because like when I was 7, I didn't know how to deal with intense shame. I didn't even know what it was. What I would realize is, wow, my whole 7-year-old inner child is not a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very disconnected from him because I don't want to feel what he feels.
Right.
And the late John Bradshaw, you've probably gotten into some John Bradshaw work.
He was brilliant.
Yeah, so he has a quote that says, this might oversimplify it, but maybe not. All addiction is a symptom of not feeling what you're feeling. So I found when we can make connection to our feelings, especially those past pains and traumas, and feel the feelings, feeling is the evidence of healing, it is a huge, huge, huge step of recovery. It's connecting to ourself, and it's recovering thyself. And in my opinion, one of the biggest forms of hell on earth is living beside yourself. You not being connected to you. To me, it's a form of self-betrayal. And not to make this too much about me, but I'm going to make it a little bit more about me. Last night at the book signing, I was giving a talk, and someone asked me a question about my comedy. And the moral of the story was, about 2.5 years ago when I started making comedy videos, it was a very important rite of passage of reconnecting with a part of me. Yeah. When I was 7, when I was 4, those young ages, I developed a sense of humor in order to disconnect from pain. And the more I would use humor, the funnier I got. I was getting more practice with it, but the more disconnected I was getting with myself. Let me cover up the pain with the dirt of humor. The flowers of humor. Cover up the dirt with the flowers of humor. Change the analogy. So I found when I reclaimed my inner comedian in a big way a couple of years ago, it was really reconnecting with like the wounded 7-year-old inner child that was covering himself up with the camouflage of comedy. And that's why when I'm not sure if y'all have heard me talk about like my breakthrough making videos, it was something comedy videos, something I was so resistant to for so long. It was so scary to me, like, it'll discredit me professionally. But it was me connecting to me, another part of me in a big way. So maybe connection is a huge, huge, huge force of healing that we all need in our lives. And P.S., like addicts too. So I talk, kind of haphazardly there because, again, haven't worked directly with addicts. That hasn't been my specialty, but I'm just curious. Your thoughts on any of that ramble, my friend?
Well, I think a lot of people probably watch your comedy videos and can connect with it because they can see all of these things that they have pursued and that many people pursue, trying to find joy and enlightenment and connection. And you know that there's just a lot of crazy shit out there. Yeah. And it's and humor brings a lightness to it. And I believe humor is critical, especially when you're going through difficult, challenging times. Like if you're stressed or you're having a shitty day, I mean, the more you can inject laughter. I made that comment earlier. We were shooting videos earlier where, that whole saying, an apple a day will keep the doctor away, unless you realize the sugar in the apple could perhaps make you have to go there. Anyway,
and
there's that. But laughter every day will probably keep the doctor away, and it'll really allow you to just feel alive. So when, like, if there's a cut or someone's cutting themselves, you know, in some ways they don't feel, and they just need to feel, even if the feeling is pain. That is something other than feeling neglected or, and I'm not, there's many reasons why people cut, okay, so I'm not trying to say that's the reason. It's just with connection, it's so critical. So let me go through some things that I've actually learned on this journey that I've been on for a couple of years. Now, when I say we, I have several partners that are, you know, Renee Area, Akira Chain, with Chan is how he likes it, and John Butcher, who's the chairman of Precious Moments and makes the figurine. These are partners in Artists for Addicts and the things that I'm doing with Genius Recovery. And we've been traveling around doing interviews with members of, you know, communities, and with doctors, and with therapists, and with addicts themselves, and with family members that have had family members that have died, and, you know, interviewing positive and heartbreaking and all these stories, and doctors and all these different people that treat addicts. And then I have, you know, a lot of dear friends that are real true experts. Their business is helping people with addictions, people like Gabor Mate, people like Tommy Rosen with Recovery 2.0. And with all of these, I mean, hours and hours of conversations and people that we've interviewed, there's 4 areas that really you need to look at if you're going through recovery. The first is community. Hardly anyone recovers in isolation. Yeah. So seeking out, be it a 12-step community or some sort of community, is critical. You got to get out of just trying to fight this on your own, and being able to ask for help.
Yeah, look at, pardon my language, but look at the pride that says, yeah, I'm self-sufficient, I can do it on my own, and kind of say, well, fuck you, pride. I deserve better than that. We shouldn't fucking swear on this.
Yeah, I fucking agree with that. So so there's community. So finding a community, and don't worry alone. And a lot of people worry alone. Second is addiction is biochemical. So it's serotonin, it's dopamine, it's happy chemicals in the brain, cortisol. I mean, there's hormones, there's all these things. And if you don't address the nutritional aspects, the biochemical stuff, you're going to be in a craving state. Sure. And so nutrition, supplementation, the foods that you eat, doing as much as you can to be a clean eater, to get your chemistry as stabilized as humanly possible. And people that are struggling addicts, really don't. And I'll come back to this in a minute and tell you something profound that I heard from a doctor here in Phoenix that I recently met. And so then it's the body. The issues are in the tissues. And so if you are traumatized, you can do talk therapy all day long. You can be with the smartest people, but the trauma is in the body. So doing things like yoga, Kundalini yoga is really beneficial. EMDR, float pods, where you do the floating in a pod of salt water, meditation, breathing. There's hundreds of thousands of people in America that die every year because of tobacco. And someone will be like, why are you smoking? And what you got to realize is a smoker, sometimes that's the only time that they really breathe. Yeah. It's meditative, it's ritual. It's like, smoking a cigarette, and there'll be a lot of yogis that will say, right here between, your chest and this 1.5 foot space, or depending if you're a really tiny person.
Like an elf.
Like an elf, exactly. It's the breathing. So, addicts don't breathe very deeply, and they get that. And so smokers, a lot of times, that is their form of kind of feeling connected. And now it's also littered with chemicals that are killing them, but it is a form of meditation. So getting into, again, the issues are in the tissues. Mm-hmm. And then the final thing is the environment. If you're in a stressful environment, work, home, if you don't bring some joy to that sort of environment, or get into a place where you just aren't stressed, it's very hard to recover. So a lot of times people are like, I have the solution to addiction. You just need to talk to this doctor, or take this pill, or take this supplement. But again, it's community, it's biochemistry, it's the body, it's the environment. And if you don't address those different areas, you're not going to have as high of chances of not only getting sober, but staying sober. And that's one of the things where there's not just some simple solution to, oh, you just need to go to this, you know, because you can go to 12-step meetings, and 12-step meetings have saved people's lives.
Which is good for the first one, community.
Oh, absolutely. And for early stage recovery, it's almost critical. I've asked many therapists and doctors and addicts that, have you ever met anyone that has fully recovered from addiction? And when I say fully recovered, I mean being in recovery versus recovered. I would look as the suffering and the craving stops.
Okay.
So, however, once the craving stops, you should keep doing the practices. And I tell people all day long, even if you don't resonate with being an addict, go to a 12-step meeting. Go to an open 12-step meeting on Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Codependency Anonymous, you know, Al-Anon, which was created for family members, you know, I mean, and sit through these meetings. It's the mutual suffering. Like, there were a lot of things related to the Vietnam War where they would have, you know, traumatized veterans and soldiers that came back from war, and they would have them go to therapists, and a lot of them wouldn't get better. But when they would put them in a room with other soldiers that have gone through the trenches, and they had a rapport with these individuals that they could never get with other people. And so there's a lot to be said about mutual suffering, being able to put people together that have been through the shit together, and they're able to talk with each other and realize, yeah, you've been, you know, you're a survivor. I mean, you were molested. You have, you know, image issues. You look at yourself in the mirror and you hate yourself. You know, if you're bulimic and you go and sit in a room of other people with bulimia and you talk with them, that in and of itself brings hope. Because what meetings really do is, if you feel hopeless, you want to go and find people that believe in you more than you believe in yourself.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, that simply makes you feel better. And if you feel like your life sucks, go volunteer somewhere. Go to an animal shelter. Go to a nursing home. Go to a burn unit. Go to a children's hospital. Go to a homeless shelter, and look at people whose lives are more fucked up than yours. And as weird as that sounds, you will actually feel better. And what they learned with like 12 steps is, when you can help another addict who's totally struggling, it actually makes you better.
I'd believe that.
Yeah. And that's why it works. And so a lot of people are like, well, 12 steps don't work. You know, I've gone to meetings and I can't stay sober. I have a family member that's gone to a meeting. And I always say, well, that's like saying gyms don't work. You know, if you go to a health club and you go to a gym and you sit on the bench, but you don't bench press, you don't lift the weights, you don't get on the equipment, you don't use the exercise, you don't pick up the dumbbells, then of course it's not going to work. So the thing with communities, 12-step groups as an example, it's not an attendance program, it's a step program. And if you don't do the steps, you're not going to get the results. So, but there will be people that will go to 12 steps, and then they'll eat a lot of donuts, they'll smoke cigarettes, they'll guzzle coffee. So 12 steps are incredibly beneficial from community, but they don't address food, they don't address the body and breathing and exercise. So to give yourself the highest possibilities, you want to do a combination of things, and you have to be willing to destroy anything in your life that's not excellent.
I love that. And you know, the body one, and I know there's so many different systems of the body, but you mentioned neurotransmitter chemicals. There's a great book, The Diet Cure and the Mood Cure by Julia Ross. Have you ever read them?
Not only have I read them, but I actually met Julia Ross over a decade ago, and she actually took me through a supplement regimen specifically for addiction, because she's one of the top neuronutrient therapists in the world.
This guy is a connector. He knows everybody, but so that's not very surprising. Yeah. But her work is so powerful, and a few lessons I pulled away from it is, I mean, that's where I learned of neurotransmitters. And you know, some of the things, I guess, to set the stage, our neurotransmitter chemicals in our brain are what make us feel comfortable inside of us. They're literally mood-shaping chemicals inside of us. Dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, gamma-aminobutyric acid. Probably didn't pronounce that right, and I probably don't even care. So when we're eating sugar, alcohol, processed foods, flours, those actually displace our neurotransmitter chemicals, and those food substances can sit in the parts of the brain that should house the neurotransmitter chemicals And because there's crappy things in there, it tells the brain, stop making neurotransmitters because our neurotransmitter receptor sites are full. But they're not full of neurotransmitters, they're full of crap. So we can get into this place where being inside of ourself feels like we're laying on a bed of broken glass. So now we start perpetuating potentially addictive patterns because we're trying to get away from ourself. So we might self-medicate with more sugar because we feel like crap because we're eating sugar.
Right.
Because I just want to escape this sensation right now of feeling like I'm laying on a bed of broken glass. But then when you cut out a lot of the crap and start eating real food, like all of our neurotransmitter chemicals are made from proteins. We need like real food, not the crappy food, to help balance that out so we can have the biochemical potential to feel good inside of us, which we don't necessarily get, if someone's going to a 12-step meeting, great, giving you community, but the donuts you're eating, the coffee you're drinking too much of, that can actually be making the body component worse while you're making the community component better.
Exactly. And sugar is really the gateway drug. Sugar is the biggest culprit to the stepping stone for addictive behavior. And we are feeding so much shit to ourselves and to people and to children. And they're setting the stage for these, individuals to really be more susceptible to becoming addicts. Like, for instance, earlier I was saying there's a doctor, David Arneson, I never say his name right, theriversource.org, I believe is his website in Phoenix. And I went and met with him with my friend Paul Mittman, who is the president of the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, and then Tom Ferris, who is the Arizona Corporation Commissioner, because we're working on doing some stuff in Arizona to find a treatment system that we can have people, instead of them going to jail or prison, we can have them go through this and prove that it has efficacy to try to help people that have not committed a violent crime, first offense, that instead of throwing them in jail or prison, we get them treatment. And so one of the things we're working on is finding the best way that we can actually do this, and then see if we can, I'm working with politicians, although my world is not that. I want to just be the catalyst and let the people that know how to make these things happen with laws take it from there, hand over the baton. But I want to see if we can get something tested here in Arizona, and then if it works, see if we can take it from state to state to state. And so when we met with him, he said he's been treating people for 16 years with IV treatments. He's very familiar with Julia Ross's work. He's an expert in neuronutrients and using amino acid therapies and IVs to treat addicts. And he said to me, and I'm not going to say it exactly because he's really brilliant at the way he explained it. He said that when you see like an addict on the street that's homeless or missing teeth, he said in a lot of cases what you're seeing is modern day scurvy. Okay. And they're just not even getting good vitamin C. Yeah. And a lot of these addicts are eating donuts, they're drinking sodas, they're eating candy bars, they're eating fast food, they're getting very terrible nutrition, and they have a ton of gut problems. Yeah. And he said, talked about, serotonin's produced in the gut, dopamine's produced in the brain. And if you basically do not fix the gut, then they're always going to be in a craving state. And he said something that was fascinating to me. He said, if you do not repair the gut and get them producing happy chemicals, what happens is if you send them to jail or prison, or you send them to rehab and they can sit down with the best talk therapists, the cravings are still going to be there and they're still going to be an addict. Mm-hmm. And I said, if that's actually true, millions of people are being thrown in jail and going into treatment without having their body producing it, and they can be sitting down with even smart people that are trying to guide and direct them, but the cravings never go away. Sure. And what happens, these people then have to get drugs in prison. So we have just as bad of a drug problem and drug addiction happening in people doing drugs in prison, and we're trying to lock these people up and keep them away from it. I mean, if you can get drugs in prison, drugs are everywhere. And see, here's the challenge. The challenge aren't even the drugs. The drugs are just a symptom of a far deeper problem. The addiction is a symptom of a deeper problem, which is disconnection, which is biochemical, which is all of these things. Because if you have biochemistry, the body isn't connected. So I don't say connection just in terms of community connection. I mean, you got to make shit work, wiring in your body. And so what he does is he has a lot of success with IV treatments. And I said, well, can you treat these addicts orally? He goes, well, if their gut is so damaged, no, you actually have to bypass it. But with IVs, and we're talking a few $100s of doing IV treatments where over a period of a few weeks, and he can really fix a lot of the gut issues with people, and then getting them eating foods that are not damaging to them. And I said, if this is actually true, this would literally save millions of lives if we could figure out how to do that and then make it available. So one of the many things we're working on is trying to bring these brilliant people and seeing how do we scale that. And so what I'm trying to do is just be the curator and share this information with people, which is why we're getting ready to launch geniusrecovery.com. And right now it's just it redirects to Artists for Addicts. If you want to go there and put your name and email in, we'll notify you when Genius Recovery is. And I'm not saying this because we're not trying to get people on a list so we can pitch them stuff. Yeah. It's just once we make this available, we will put it out there. But I'm going to interview these people. We're going to videotape them. We're going to put documentaries out, and we're going to really find does this really work with numerous people. So one of the things that we're working on is seeing how do we set it up and take literally the worst addicts, street addicts, people that are homeless, and see if we can actually help them get out of that craving state. But that's just one of many things. But it's fascinating because if you look at what they feed prisoners, if you look at what most addicts eat, I mean, their diets are so unhealthy.
For sure.
And so therefore, their body is not creating the things it needs to cope.
Yeah, I would dare say the foods a lot of them are eating, a lot of the average non-addicts are eating as well, are foods that might make the belly full, but they're foods that actually take more nutrition from the body than what the foods deliver. And that is absolutely a recipe for, it's literal self-destruction. And Joe, I know you are very, very interested in treatments that are proven to work. You to me seem very uninterested in just airy-fairy abstract theoretical stuff like, oh yeah, put that on your vision board and that should work. So with the current state of research, do you have an opinion on what seems to be a little bit of a growing movement on treating addiction with psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine?
Well, here's my thoughts on that, and I will give this with a caveat that there's a lot of people that are making claims about how magical and wonderful some of these things are that are dangerous humans, and they're not.
So you're saying some of the
people that are offering, well, there's a lot of dangerous humans, but so like the psilocybins, the plant medicines, ayahuasca, ibogaine that you mentioned, EMDR, or I'm sorry, MDMA. Yeah, mixing up a method of neuro feedback and biofeedback with plant medicines. That could be a freak show, right? But let's take ibogaine as an example, which comes from the iboga root, and that has been found to be one of the most effective ways to treat opiate addiction. Very high success rates for being an addiction interrupter. It's not a cure; it's an interrupter. How it works, very complex. I'm not going to fully speak to that. There's you can find a lot of good information. There's a book called Ibogaine Explained that people can buy. It's a short book that is a very good book on ibogaine. But I'm the first person in the world to have a before and after brain scan of doing ibogaine.
Oh, you've used ibogaine?
Yeah, I went to Mexico and I took a film crew and we videotaped all of this. And then I had Dr. It was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life, but also one of the most intense. And I've never been an opiate addict. My addiction to drugs was at my worst state. I weighed 105 pounds from freebasing cocaine for 3 months straight when I was 18 years old. So if you can imagine a 5'10" male that weighed 105 pounds, that's very skinny, And so, and of course that was many years ago because I'm 49 years old now at the time we're doing this. Because if we did this a year from now, I'd be 50, right? If you kind of do the math.
That I don't know that adds up, but it'll be your opinion.
Right. But I wanted to be my own human lab rat, and so I took a film crew with me, and that'll be part of the documentary that we put out and a lot of the stuff. And I had serotonin and dopamine tests before doing it, and then I had Daniel Amen, who is the top brain scan psychiatrist in the world, who scanned my brain 6 different times. And so we did brain scans before, we did brain scans after. And what I will say is that if in that period of time after doing ibogaine, if you have an opiate addiction, if you literally change the environment and you have aftercare. See, there's a lot of rehab centers that suck. I mean, they just exploit people for money. There's a ton of relapse, a very low success rate, and there's others that are much better. So my thing is not to bash rehab centers, although many of them deserve bashing. It's a bubble, and so there are things where they can do a really good job while the person is there, but the real key is, what do you do after the treatment? Okay. What do you do? What are the rituals? What is the aftercare that you have? Do you have recovery coaching? Are you consistently going to meetings? And most people left to their own devices are going to go create trouble. So to have accountability and to have loved ones, if you have loved ones, if you have no family members or any that are functional, then you actually have to create your own community. You have to seek that out. And so there's the drugs that kill people are legal. The drugs that can actually help people are illegal. Not all of them, but that's the damaging thing. And sure. there's if you really want to know the history of the war on drugs, go read Chasing the Scream by Johann Hari, which is the first and last days of the war on drugs. Read In the Realm of Hungry Ghost by Gabor Mate. If you read American Pain, there's so many things related to how these things became illegal, why they're illegal. But there's so much research that is coming out, psilocybin, LSD, but most people are saying, oh, let me go have a conscious journey, let me have an experience. Some of my friends that will go to Burning Man, and they're like, yeah, we're going to have a journey. It's like, no, you're just going to get high in a trailer.
You're going to have a bender, for sure.
Yeah. So, but again, I mean, everyone has their opinions, and what I just said will piss off some people or whatever. But the thing is like, what's your intention behind it? And if you can actually go to people that really have experience guiding people through trauma, I mean, I've seen it change people's lives. I've met people that have met one guy after I did the ibogaine that had been to 5 different treatment centers, his family had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to help him stay sober and get off opiates, and he kept relapsing. And he did ibogaine, and he's like, for the first time in my life, I don't have any cravings. And people can go through ibogaine for far less than most treatment centers and without withdrawals. They can literally go through it without the pain of withdrawals. Wow. But it's very intense. And I mean, if I would have prepared people always ask me, what was it like? Describe it. I could talk for the next 10 years trying to describe it. No one would get it. And the best description I had was, someone told me it was like going through hell on God's shoulders. Wow. I mean, it was scary. It was terrifying. But man, I mean, I saw millions of images and faces, and is a 12-hour long trip, and the first 5 hours of it was the most scary, horrifying experiences ever. But then it became beautiful, and it was really powerful, and it's the closest thing I've ever experienced to, like, if whatever facing death is like, it felt so mentally like whoosh. But man, do I think people would be well served to look into it with caution? Definitely, but worth exploring. And if you've tried a million things and it's not helped you, in a properly guided plant medicine journey. And by the way, this is things you're going to have to do outside of the country if you're in the U.S.
You were in Mexico, you said, with your ibogaine experience.
Oh yeah.
And you might have mentioned, I apologize, but are you able to give the name of the center that you went to?
Yeah, crossroadsibogaine.com.
Gotcha.
Yeah, IBOGAINE, crossroadsibogaine.com. There's also a guy you can look up named Dr. Dan Engel and Martine Palenko. I actually referred both of them to Tim Ferriss, and Tim Ferriss ended up doing a 2.5-hour podcast just on the subject with Dan and Martine, and so that's how Tim has met them, and he writes about it in his new book and all that sort of stuff. But that's where I went for that, and then there's I also did an experience which I won't talk about the place publicly. It was outside of the country. It's going to be in the documentary that I do. But I went and did ayahuasca with one of the top addiction doctors in the world. And that was, and I'm a guy that doesn't even like taking an aspirin. Sure. I mean, I have not had sugar in over 6 months. I've not had a drop of caffeine in over 6 months. I'm a very clean eater. I rarely, eat dairy and grains. I try to eat, very healthy, very organic food. I don't like putting medicine into my system because I nearly killed myself with drugs. But it was, there's a lot. I'm being my own human lab right now. I'm looking at all of these things that have success, and we're looking at the efficacy of these because in my journey you can talk about I want to make an impact, but who the hell cares about an impact unless the impact produces a result? I want to do research. Well, unless the research produces a result, or I want to have awareness. Well, what's the point of awareness if it doesn't lead to a result? So we're really trying to find things that give a result. And it's, I wish I could, say to everyone out there that here's exactly what you do, but it's complicated.
Sure.
Ariana Huffington, I've had speak at my events before, and in 2012 we went to, with my buddy Peter Diamandis, who started the X Prize Foundation. We went to her home after my event that both of them were speaking at. We did a business event, and it was an X Prize for literally like a global learning for children. And there was a guy there that was in charge of the documentaries at HBO, like all the life documentaries. And I was talking to him about the different HBO documentaries that they had done. And I said, which one was the most difficult one you had done? And back in 2007, they did a really well done series called Addiction. They wrote a book about it. It was like, you can literally find it online. You can buy it on Amazon. This was done, 10 years ago. So there's been a lot that has been discovered since 2007. But he said to me, he goes, we spent over a year interviewing over 1,000 doctors, family members, addicts. And he's like, and at the end of that documentary, we still didn't have a clear answer on what to do when you're addicted. And I was like, this is a complicated thing. So when people come up to me and say, I know the solution to addiction, or I have the cure for addiction, I'll listen to them, but they usually have a piece of the puzzle. Sure. Because it's not just one thing. It's not just as easy as like, I'm thirsty, drink a glass of water. Yeah. I mean, there's community. There's biochemical, there's the body, there's the environment. Like if someone goes and does ibogaine as an example, and then goes back to the same stressful job, same stressful thing, maintains the same rituals, eats the same diet, doesn't have aftercare, they're probably going to relapse. Yeah. And that's the deal. So you have to, and how do you make someone thirsty? That's the key. I mean, there's definitely people that are watching us right now or will watch this later that are addicts. Sure. And they're in isolation. They're addicted to porn. They're watching porn every night for maybe hours a day. They're internet gamers, and they're like gamequitters.com is a great place for people that are addicted to video games, run by a buddy of mine named Cam Adair. And so there's a lot of resources. Tommy Rosen has Recovery 2.0, which is a recovery coaching program. Deanne Adamson has beingtruetoyou.com, which is individual one-on-one coaching. There's a lot of resources and people that are doing things, but the awareness of, for one, admitting that you have an addiction, that you're struggling, you have to be able to see that and be able to look at your own shit and be willing. And there's a difference between secrecy and privacy. And so you want to be able to disclose if you're cheating on your spouse, if you're lying, if especially if you've ever, like, people that are predators, as an example, almost all of them had a predator do it to them, and they're living it out in other ways. You have a lot of things like the Catholic Church, as an example, where a lot of these men that molest boys
were actually molested themselves in the same exact environment. You know, and people think they're monsters, and you can argue that, yeah, that's a freaking horrendous thing to do. If you look back at people's lives, it actually makes sense. When you see people doing crazy shit, something happened. And I'm not making an excuse for people doing bad things. This is not like let them off the hook sort of thing, because there are, I don't know quite what to do with a lot of the people that have like taken it to the point to where they've really harmed and damaged another person. What I do know though is if you don't start trying to understand the causation, and if you don't bring a level of compassion and it's immediate judgment, or like let's chop off their freaking heads, I mean, is that how you're going to solve this global issue? And I'll tell you this, to take it a step further, there's a lot of data that can be argued that World War II was created by addiction.
You were talking about this the other night. Please, this is fascinating. Yeah. Please share this.
Well, I'm not even going to say it right, but so I was having dinner with my buddy Pat Carnes, who is the top sex addiction doctor in the world, and he just got a Fulbright scholarship, and he's doing studies on linking the type of mental illness that someone has with the type of way that they do their addiction, because there's no such thing as just a pure alcoholic. I mean, usually someone that is an addict is like a workaholic, a sex addict, a rageaholic, that sort of thing, and it's a coping mechanism. Yeah. So it's rare that someone just has one thing and the rest of their life is totally in harmony, right? So crazy makers have a whole variety of different crazy making tools in their toolbox. And so we were talking, and there's a couple of documentaries. One's called High Hitler, H-I-G-H Hitler, and another one is called Hitler's Secret Drug Habit. And there's a new book on this that just came out called Blitzed. And basically in 1931, I believe it was, and please, like, if I get the dates not totally accurate, don't...
Like, if it was 1932, please, a lot of negative comments towards Joe. Like, just, he deserves it. How dare you?
Right, exactly. As a horrible historian that I am. But it was called something like Perpetine. And basically, Nazi Germany, they invented crystal meth. And they were giving it to most of the German army. And Hitler was being given IV treatments of vitamins and a whole concoction of different drugs. His doctor kept a journal of this, and so there's a lot of evidence of that when you see Hitler doing these very motivating type speeches and yelling and screaming and like a motivational speaker, he was high as a kite.
Yeah. And I'm this crystal meth.
Crystal and a whole concoction of different drugs. I mean, he was just on a lot of shit. And what they have found is that when someone takes, when they gave it to the German army, they could fight harder, they could have less sleep, they were just more driven to go out and, do what they did. And when they would, shoot someone in the back of the head or, torture someone or lead them to death in a concentration camp, it's I mean, how could you not look at that as being incredibly inhumane? But what they have found is when someone takes crystal meth for long periods, or even short periods, it actually removes empathy. So people are able to do awful shit without being able to connect. It makes people disconnected. And so most of the German army, so much of these people were under the influence. And so much of history, people were under the influence. There's an episode of the podcast, Hardcore History. There's an episode on, history under the influence, worth listening to, because you will get a different perspective of how much addiction is involved in everything. But you don't hear that story. Yeah. You don't hear, it's like these people were fucking high. They were being fed drugs. And in that sort of situation, especially directed in very evil ways, awful shit happens. And so, 20% of the U.S., I think 20% of women in the U.S. are on antidepressants. I mean, we are a country that is constantly, and I shouldn't say country, so much of the world is under the influence. People are drinking, caffeine and all kinds of different things daily. And this is not a moral sort, like you should or you should not do it. It's just how it's being done, how it's being done. So much of the foods are incredibly addictive, so filled with sugars and so filled with things. I mean, there are a lot of companies that sit and figure out how to create things that will addict you. Like, it's like
gaming in Las Vegas. I mean, there's a fascinating book called Addiction by Design about gaming in Las Vegas and how they hook you. And when you're looking, like for instance, if someone thinks, well, I'm not an addict, I've heard current stats, and I have no idea what the accuracy is of it, but based on the usage of Facebook, that the average American right now, based on how many minutes or hours a day Facebook is used, that they have somehow come, I've heard this calculation that they're spending 4 years of their life on Facebook.
And I'm guessing the trajectory is for that not to get shorter.
No.
I find myself, I tend to use social media selfishly. Like, I'll publish stuff, but I don't like to quote unquote consume very much. But with that said, when I jump on Facebook, like maybe I want to check Messenger or something, oftentimes I'll catch myself, I've been scrolling through Facebook for 3 minutes. And when I got on, I had zero intention of doing that. But there was just something about my user experience, how it's designed, maybe with significant deliberate intent to addict your attention to it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like this, I love it when I catch myself doing it. It's like, okay, I can get out of it. I can not slide down that slippery slope any further. But also at the same time, there's this like weird feeling of like, I just lost control. I did something for 3 minutes I didn't really consciously know I was doing.
And it hooked you and it pulled you in. And now here's the thing. This is not to bash all of the amazing things with technology.
Sure.
Part of it is just to have you actually look at these things are constantly like little dopamine drips that will pull you in and are very stimulating, and the brain craves it. It literally makes you hungry. And if you're not careful, you're going to get sucked in. I mean, there's a documentary made called Screenagers. We're not teenagers, but they're screenagers, and there's so much of human life that is now interacting with screens, and as virtual reality and augmented reality and AI and machine learning and all of these algorithms, because I'm in the marketing business. I teach people how to do marketing and stuff. I mean, if you really want to understand so much of marketing, I mean, you are part of an algorithm that is literally feeding up to you exactly what your interests are showing, what your friends are doing, what politician you like or you hate. I mean, they're feeding up to you exactly what your brain is saying it wants. And it's more powerful than most people's conscious awareness, and it will suck you in. So so people will do drugs to sort of numb out from this. People will do behaviors to sort of numb out for this. People see normal everyday life is quite boring if you don't have all the stimuli. And so now, a lot of people, they cannot sit still without an audiobook playing or without music playing or without a background video or without some sort of screen. And again, this is not like saying, because the fact that we can even do this right now is fantastic.
It's a miracle.
I mean, look how many people were able to actually, depending if anyone likes anything I'm saying here or that you're saying here, which of course they do, because I think you get more likes when you're talking because this is JP's audience, but my name is Joe Polish, so I mean, we're both JP.
That's right.
But
That's
anyway.
right.
No, but the thing is, though, is like, we could never have this sort of experience, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
We couldn't do this. And so it's absolutely fascinating. It's useful, but the thing is like, what is it doing for you? I mean, like I always talk to people about, I've got so many books, there's so many things to read, there's so many things to watch. I have a client who said, great question, what needs solved? What needs solved in your life? And if there's some area that needs solved, that's what you should read books about. That's people you should hang out with. Those are things that you should study. And you certainly should give yourself some disconnection from the false forms of connection.
Sure.
And you should really connect with humans, because we're more connected electronically than we ever have been in human history, but we're more disconnected like in tribes and with real friendships. If I was FaceTiming with you or we were talking that way, I mean, yeah, I could still talk with you, but it's completely different than us hanging out and doing all the shenanigans we've been doing for the last 2 days.
It is, which have been fun. And in a second, I've got to go to the airport.
Yes.
And
can't wait to get his ass out of here.
if you appreciate Joe, his message, and honestly, I think the biggest thing is how much he cares, how big his heart is. Please give him some thumbs up and some hearts on the screen. I mean, I just really appreciate the heck out of you, brother, taking your time to share some of your message. I love the wisdom you bring to the table, and I love your humbleness that you bring to the table, where you don't falsely pretend, here's the answer, let's package it and profit from it. You are all about, let's ask the bigger questions, let's be the curious explorers so we can help people. And you're an absolute dear friend, and Joe's arranged it with me. I'll be speaking at his big event this year, the Genius Network event in November. I'll be doing some hosting and maybe entertaining people. So Joe, remind us, where can we, first off, check out this cause of addiction we've been speaking about, as well as check you out more directly?
Thank you. Well, my name is Joe Polish. You can do a search for me on the internet. As it relates to what we're talking about here, and it's polish like nail polish or shoe polish, however you want to spell polish. Spelled the same way as Polish too, but I pronounce it polish. With the stuff related to addiction and recovery, I'd love to have you watch the trailer at artistsforaddicts.com. Artists with an S, ARTISTS, for FOR, addicts, ADDICTS.com. And there's a trailer there. We're also getting ready to launch Genius Recovery, and that's going to be up in anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. And there's going to be resources of where to find all kinds of different communities, from 12-step groups to different, if you're not a person that is interested in 12 steps, different forms of community that people can go to. We're going to have so many free resources that we just want to be like the curators of the very best information that is genius level. Like, what is the greatest stuff on addiction and recovery and treatment that is available, videos, resources, and we're going to launch a podcast, Genius Recovery Podcast. I'm going to do another interview with you, JP, and things like that. And so right now, geniusrecovery.com redirects to Artists for Addicts. And if you want information about this, if this resonates with you, just enter your name and email there, and we'll send, or just your email, and we'll certainly notify you when we are launching Genius Recovery. And there's just a lot of great stuff out there. If you are really struggling right now and you're in pain, look up whatever your addiction is. Alcoholics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous. If you've never been to a 12-step meeting, go to like a CODA meeting or an Al-Anon meeting. One thing that's said in Al-Anon, a couple of great lines, is say what you mean, but don't be mean. And whatever is hysterical is historical. So if you find yourself overreacting or underreacting, it's probably not what's going on in the present moment. It's something that probably happened in the past. And you want to get to a place where you don't react negatively to life, you actually respond. And that's why we did yoga today. That's why we do a lot of things that we do. And I really appreciate you having me sharing with your audience, which is used to your humor, would probably rather hear you be funny than hear a guy like me talking about addiction stuff. But I know this is such an important thing for you, and that you're such a champion of the human spirit and wanting to be helpful to people. And so I've just had a wonderful time hanging out with JP, and this is awesome. And so I appreciate all of the hearts and likes and your attention. And if you have any addict that is struggling or suffering and you don't know what to do, try to look at them with compassion and realize that they were probably hurt and something bad happened to them, and just offer them as much love that you can muster. And if there's such a difficult person that you don't know how to do it, just literally go get yourself some support, because at the end of the day, connection is the opposite of addiction is connection. And the more connected you are with yourself, and the more connected you can be with other people, the easier it is going to be to get through life. So that's what I have to say for now.
Beautiful, brother. This has been a very meaningful conversation. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. And we appreciate you guys. Thank you for taking some time to join us and contemplate life. I appreciate y'all, and we'll be talking soon.